Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, one of the truly most remarkable stories I've ever had the privilege to tell. You'll meet the Black Klan Whisperer next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, I often wonder what Dr. Martin Luther King would think of today's world. He had a dream some 50 plus years ago, and I wonder if he would cry at the society that we have today. Obviously, we've made some strides, but in some respects, we're more divided than ever. You're going to meet an amazing man. He's in my studio, and you're going to meet him in just 1 second, but I want you to hear the backstory. Let's go ahead and roll a tape.
Hi, my name is Daryl Davis. I was born in 1958 in Chicago, Illinois. I am a professional musician with a degree in jazz. I spent 32 years working with the king of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, playing the piano for him. I'm also an actor who has some credits on stage and screen, and I'm a lecturer, speaking on my work in race reconciliation. I am the first Black author to write a book on the Ku Klux Klan from first-person interviews. A Klan member is not born with that Robin Hood. That is a learned ideology, and what can be learned can be unlearned. In the 4th grade, 1968, I participated in a Cub Scout parade, and I was the only Black Scout participating in this parade. And everything was going fine until we reached one point in the parade route when suddenly I was being hit by rocks and bottles and soda pop cans by a small group of white spectators. When I got home at the end of the day, my parents were putting Band-Aids on me and asking me how did I fall down. I told them what happened, and for the first time in my life, they sat me down and explained to me what racism was. So when I first started this mission, my goal was just to simply sit down with these racist people and ask them the question, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? You start off here, at opposite ends of the spectrum. You talk for 5 minutes, you find something in common, the gap narrows. You spend 10 minutes, you find more in common, and it narrows. And by the time you get here, you realize that such things as skin color, or whether you go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple, matter less and less. I don't say that I converted anybody. I say that I gave them the impetus to convert themselves. Over the last 4 decades, the number of members who have left that ideology, perhaps 45 to 60 white supremacists. And it's only fostered through conversation. A missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. That is what accelerates progress. Not doing it by yourself, but bringing people in with you.
Well, I don't often get chills when I see someone's story, but somebody needs to call Leslie Stahl with 60 Minutes because I hear the tick, 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 tick in my ears. This has to be a national story on everybody's heart right now. In studio, Daryl Davis, known as the Black Klan Whisperer, and Gail Davis, no relation. She's the president and founder of GDA Speakers. Thank you both for coming to the studio.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, before we hear from you, Daryl, I want Gail to share how she found you.
Well, I have a colleague in our industry that reached out to me one day and said, this is a story that everyone needs to hear. And it's ironic that you started with a reference to Martin Luther King, because I had the privilege of being on site at a large corporate event in January of this year on Martin Luther King Day, and Daryl spoke to a room of about 1,700 people. It's an amazing story, and the time is absolutely ripe for it, in that it's all about how we all want to be seen, and we want to be heard, and we want to be respected, and how you have to start the conversation. So I did that in January, and then tonight in Dallas, I'm doing something completely different, which is a fun behind the music event where he's going to talk about racism in music when he played for Chuck Berry.
Wow. Okay, well, you teed that up perfectly. Tell us about that.
Well, Chuck Berry has been one of my idols for years. He invented rock and roll. And rock and roll is an undercredited fighter in the civil rights movement. While there have always been people who like music from all different backgrounds, right? Back in the day, concert halls, venues where you had live music were segregated if they allowed blacks into the buildings at all. There was divided seating with ropes going around with signs hanging down that would say seating for white patrons only, colored seating only. So, for example, if Gail and I went to go see Glenn Miller Orchestra or somebody back in the day, we could not sit together. It was against the law. And if we cross-sat, we would be arrested. So that Jim Crow law was still in place in the 1950s. But two things happened. Rock and roll was created by Chuck Berry. It was popularized by people like Elvis Presley and Bill Haley and the Comets, etc. White kids and black kids could not sit still when they heard that new beat. And they bounced up out of their chairs, knocking over these segregation signs, and began boogieing and dancing in the aisles together for the first time in American history. And understand that these kids did not know each other, because in the 1950s, black kids and white kids did not go to school together. You might have seen the guy on the other side of the railroad tracks walking down the street, but you didn't know that person, but yeah, you were dancing with them. This would cause the law to come in and shut down those concerts. City fathers, mayors, people like that began banning rock and roll concerts from their town because it was corrupting white youth.
Wow. The timing of this message couldn't be more important, because I'll tell you a story. On September 11th, I remember people coming out of the buildings, and they were covered with dust, and you couldn't tell black, white, Hispanic. And it seemed like for a moment the country was united. We were under attack. But then we fell into familiar patterns where suddenly we're dividing ourselves by race or religion. And so, Daryl, I'd like to stay with you. Why do you think we do that?
People tend to be more comfortable around familiarity, what they can identify with, what they look like, speak the same language, grow up with culturally, things like that. Does that necessarily mean that they're racist? No, not necessarily. They just appreciate familiarity. And by the way, most Americans, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, do not travel. So we lack the exposure in this country of people who do travel, like, say, Europeans. They're always traveling. In fact, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, very few Americans even own passports. So that's another thing why we're so divided along those lines. And I'm a firm believer that conversation brings people together. We spend way too much time in this country talking about the other person, talking at the other person, and talking past the other person. Why don't we spend a little bit of time talking with the other person? And like you mentioned Martin Luther King in the beginning of this program, Martin Luther King said, his famous I Have a Dream speech, I'll paraphrase one part of it, where he said he had a dream that one day the sons of former slave owners would sit down to the table of brotherhood with the sons of former slaves. And that's exactly what I'm doing today to make his dream come true.
And Gail, I have to imagine his message is in demand right now. I can't think of a conference that doesn't deal with diversity.
It is hugely popular, and it has been since George Floyd. So I think all companies, many have employee resource groups, so they'll have maybe a Black Connect group. But there more and more you see organizations bringing this message in for top leadership, and it really translates. It's Beautiful.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of take-home value.
And Daryl is an absolutely amazing speaker. We're going to just show you this clip from a TED Talk.
I had my secretary call Mr. Kelly and tell him that she works for someone who's writing a book on the Klan. Would he consent to sitting down and doing an interview face-to-face? I told her, do not tell him that I'm black. He'll figure that out when he sees me, if he agrees, right? So she called, he didn't ask what color I was, and agreed to do the interview. We secured a motel room. She and I got there super early. We filled up the ice bucket with ice, put some cans of soda in there to get them to get them cold, and to be able to offer him a beverage when he arrived. I didn't know what he was going to do, or once he saw me, would he attack me? Would he say, I'm not going to talk to you and walk away? Or would he come in and sit down and do the interview? Either way, I wanted to be ready to be hospitable and offer him a cold drink. So when he arrived, first in walks his bodyguard, who was armed. Right behind him was the leader of the Klan in a dark blue suit and tie. When the bodyguard stepped into the room and saw me, he froze. And the leader did not realize that his guard had stopped. He slammed into his back and knocked him forward. And they began looking all around the room like, something's wrong. Either we're in the wrong room or this is an ambush. So I stood up, and I went like this to show I had nothing in my hands, and I walked forward and said, hi, I'm Daryl Davis. He shook my hand. The bodyguard shook my hand as well. I said, come on in, have a seat. The leader sat down with the bodyguard standing to attention at his right. I sat down, we got on with this interview. But I had a bag beside me in which I had some blank cassettes. I had a cassette player on the table, so every time my cassette would run out, I'd reach down into the bag, pull out a fresh cassette. Every time I'd reach like this, the bodyguard would reach like this. After a while, he realized there was no threat in the bag, and he relaxed. A little over an hour into this interview, there was kind of a strange noise, and we all jumped. And I knew that the Klan leader had made that noise. I didn't know what that noise was. I'd never heard a noise like that before, so I automatically perceived it to be an ominous, threatening noise. And I was hearing that other Klansman's voice in my head, Daryl, Roger Kelly will kill you. I didn't want to die. I popped up out of my chair. I hit the table. I was getting ready to come across that table and take down the Klan leader and the bodyguard because I was not armed. But I was going to just slam them down to the ground, take away the guy's gun. I did not want to die. I did not want my secretary to die. Well, when I came up, my eyes locked with the Klan leader. I didn't say a word. My eyes spoke loud and clear. They were saying to him, what did you just do? Well, his eyes had locked with mine. He didn't say a word, but I could read his eyes. His eyes were saying to me, what did you just do? And the bodyguard was looking back and forth between both of us like this, what did either one of y'all just do? My secretary realized what happened. The ice in the bucket had melted, and the cans of soda came cascading down the ice. And then it made that same noise, and we all began laughing at how ignorant we all had been. Yes, we're enemies. He's the head of the Klan, I'm a black guy. But for that moment, we shared a common laughter. It was a teaching moment. I won't say it was a learning moment yet, but it was a teaching moment. And the lesson taught was this: all because some foreign entity of which we were unaware, that being the bucket of ice and cans of soda, entered into our little comfort zone via the noise that it made, we became fearful and accusatory of one another. The lesson taught is this: ignorance breeds fear. If you do not keep that fear in check, that fear in turn will breed hatred, because we hate those things that frighten us. If you do not keep that hatred in check, that hatred in turn will breed destruction. We want to destroy those things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? They may have been harmless, and we were simply ignorant. So we just had some more laughs. We carried on with the conversation. No more problem.
Well, you may be the most courageous person I've ever met. I mean, when you embarked on writing this book, did you fear for your life?
No, I did not fear for my life. You know, very, very few things frighten me, honestly. But for me, it's more curiosity than courage. And I believe in, rather than get furious, let's get curious.
And you've written one book, and you've got another one coming out. Tell us the name of the first book.
The first book was called Clandestine Relationships. Clandestine spelled with a K, not a C. And the second book, which will come out this year, the working title right now is called The Klan Whisperer. And it will have a lot from the old book plus updates and new stories, because the first book, Clandestine Relationships, came out back in 1997. And since that time, we've had a black president, we've had more immigration, we've had January 6th, we've had a president that divided the country a little bit more, et cetera. And all of these things have, fueled white supremacy, whether it's the Klan or our neo-Nazis over here or other people. So, therefore, I need to update and tell what's going on today.
And it sounds like your message is very hopeful. Like you feel like everybody can make a difference.
Absolutely. Listen, I am a rock and roll piano player. I'm not a sociologist or psychologist. But if I can get out there and do these things and have people, rethink their ideology and turn over their robes and hoods and swastika flags to me, anybody out there can do it.
Wow. Gail, what's been the reaction to some of his talks that you've been
I think hopeful is a great word. And I think people realize they can do their small part. You and I are both members of EO Dallas, and our theme this year is perspective. And to me, Daryl's story gives us all a valuable perspective that's really applicable now.
Absolutely. We're almost out of time, so I want to give you both a chance to give final thoughts. Daryl, let's start with you.
Well, I firmly believe that a missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. We spend, just as I said, way too much time talking about somebody else rather than talking with that person. The most effective weapon to combat any kind of discrimination is also the least expensive. It's free, yet it remains the most underused. It's called conversation.
Wow.
So let's cancel culture and engage in more conversation.
I just want you to do voiceover work for my company. I love those golden tones. All right, Gail, we'll give you the final word.
I think that we are just so lucky to have people like Daryl in our world that can take us inside the heart and the mind and the experience of someone who's different than us. And through his work, it's allowed us to see things differently, and hopefully we do better.
Wow, great way to end this segment. We're going to end with Gail's speaking website, which is GDASpeakers.com. Go ahead and reach out to her for all of her amazing speakers, including Daryl. Thanks both for coming on the show.
Thank you.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.